what the tradition is, and certainly broadband does that for us. Earlier, Madam Speaker, I had the distinct pleasure of saying how honored I would be to be joined by our co-anchor tonight, Congressman Richie Torres from New York. So with that, I'd like to yield him as much time as needed for him to make an opening statement as we co-anchor tonight. Congressman Richie Torres.
Thank you, Chair Beatty, and I know that brevity is the soul of wit, so I will express my thoughts as succinctly as I can, but I'm honored to be the co-chair of the CBC Special Order Hour and to serve under the dynamic leadership of the CBC Chair, Joyce Beatty, who is a force to be reckoned with, and thank you for affording me the honor to co-chair the CBC Special Order Hour. You know, I want to echo what our Majority Whip said, that we cannot afford to take an obsolete view of infrastructure. You know, infrastructure is about more than roads and bridges. It's about the quality of the air we breathe and the water we drink. It's about access to the internet, especially in a world of remote learning and telehealth. It is about safe, decent, affordable housing, which is a human right. You know, Abraham Maslow spoke about a hierarchy of needs. And the highest need we have is self-actualization. And in order to actualize ourselves, we have to meet our most fundamental needs, our need for employment and housing and transit and education. That's what we mean by infrastructure. Infrastructure is not simply physical, but it's social and human. It is that which enables us to become the best version of ourselves. You know, the component of infrastructure that matters most to me is affordable housing. I would not be where I am today were it not for affordable housing and the stability that it gave me and my family. You know, for me, affordable housing is not simply brick and mortar, but it's the foundation on which we build a better life for ourselves and our family. You know, it's often said that the South Bronx is the poorest congressional district in America, but I think of the South Bronx as the essential congressional district because it's home to essential workers who put their lives at risk during the peak of the pandemic so that the rest of the city and the country could safely shelter in place. And I believe deeply that the essential workers of America, the essential workers of New York City, should be able to afford to live in a city that cannot survive and succeed without them. Now, the American Jobs Plan proposes hundreds of billions of dollars in new funding for affordable housing. But just as important as the dollar amount is how those dollars are spent. If we simply invest those dollars in expanding housing supply without expanding housing subsidy, then we run the risk of creating housing that leaves behind the lowest income Americans. We run the risk of creating the appearance rather than the reality of affordable housing. And when the subject of affordable housing is raised, the question that often comes to mind is affordable for whom? We need deep affordability. We need real affordability. And the best path to deep affordability, to affordability for all Americans, is housing vouchers for all. A housing voucher ensures that you pay no more than 30% of your income toward your rent. And I'm honored to sponsor legislation with Chair Waters and Subcommittee Chair Cleaver, which would expand the Section 8 program and establish housing vouchers as an entitlement, as a human right codified in federal law. You know, housing vouchers for all takes on a special urgency because we are facing the greatest affordability crisis that we have seen since the Great Depression. There are 37 million Americans who pay more than a third of their income toward their rent. There are 17 million Americans who pay more than half their income toward their rent. And that does not even factor in the cost of utilities and food and transportation and healthcare. There are millions of Americans who are living on the brink of foreclosure and eviction in the midst of COVID-19. And at the heart of the affordability crisis is a gap between supply and demand. The demand for affordable housing far exceeds the supply. And I'll provide you with some statistics in New York City. In New York City, there are 1 million households earning at or below 50% of AMI, which is about $60,000 a year. But there are only 420,000 units affordable to those households. That's a gap of 580,000 units. And that is why we need a federal government that's going to take an expansive view of infrastructure and invest in the creation and preservation of affordable housing on a scale that we have not seen before. Our country deserves no less. And I yield back.
Thank you so much for those eye-opening remarks, and it gives me great pleasure at this time to yield the floor, Madam Speaker, to Congressman Bobby Scott. Congressman Scott hails from Virginia's 3rd Congressional District. A proud member of the Congressional Black Caucus, he is also one of those 6 chairs that I referenced earlier. He is chair of the Education and Labor Committee. He's a scholar. He's a lawyer. He also takes the lead role when we talk about the Congressional Black Caucus and how we plan for the future, not only for education and child care, but also how we plan for the Congressional Black Caucus budget. It gives me great honor, Madam Speaker, to yield the floor to my colleague and friend, Congressman Bobby Scott.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank the gentlelady for yielding, but more importantly, I thank her for her leadership of the Congressional Black Caucus and her leadership on the Financial Services Committee. Madam Speaker, we are slowly recovering from the economic mess that we inherited after the last administration. The number of jobs up, unemployment down, initial claims for unemployment insurance down. The economy is going in the right direction, but clearly not fast enough. That's why the American Jobs Plan and the American Family Plan are so important. The American Jobs Plan will create funding for the traditional infrastructure like roads, bridges, tunnels, rail, public transit, also investments in ports. Also proposes significant investment in broadband, and we've heard how important broadband is because it connects families and businesses to the internet and connects students to the internet. Those students who did not have connectivity could not take advantage of educational opportunities for over a year. And if they don't get connectivity, they will be disadvantaged going forward. We need to have universal broadband, and the investments in the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan will go a long way towards universal access to broadband. We have even electric charging stations for people who are not inclined to buy electric cars if they can't charge those cars on the highway. And people are not building charging stations along the highway because there are not that many electric cars. The American Jobs Plan will have funding for electric charging stations so that more people will be inclined to buy electric cars. And not surprisingly, as soon as that happens, all of the restaurants up and down the highways will have charging stations, so people will be inclined to hook up, and while they're waiting, they'll go in and take advantage of the restaurant. But those are just some of the investments in the American Jobs Plan. It also includes school construction. There's an article recently in Virginia that told the story that about 50% of the schools in the Commonwealth of Virginia are over 50 years old. That sends a disappointing message to students when they're going into old schools, gives the impression that education is not important. We need to improve our schools, and we can do that with the funding in the American Jobs Plan. We have funding to improve housing that we've heard, and many other projects, creating millions of jobs, good-paying jobs, mostly union jobs where they're guaranteed to be able to negotiate a decent wage and equal pay for equal work. But those jobs will go unfilled unless we also pass the American Families Plan, which has funding for child care and early childhood education, improved child nutrition, so parents can actually go to work, job training and apprenticeships, and improved access to higher education, so workers can get the skills needed to perform those jobs. These bills will create millions of jobs and enable workers to perform those jobs, and these programs will be fiscally responsible because they will be paid for. And that's how we will build back a better America. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much to Congressman Bobby Scott, and you're right. Tonight is about building back better. Tonight is about the Congressional Black Caucus demonstrating our power, our message. And as I talk, Madam Speaker, about our power and our message, it gives me great pleasure to yield the floor to Congressman ANDRÉ CARSON, who hails from Indiana's 7th Congressional District. He is the grandson of a legend, someone who served in this House, someone that I had the opportunity to know and to witness her work in Congresswoman Julia Carson. But tonight, my friend, my colleague, a leader, when we talk about intelligence or counterterrorism, when we talk about looking at the future and how we stand up for infrastructure. He serves on the Transportation Committee. So he comes to us this evening to share his thoughts on how the Congressional Black Caucus can help with this infrastructure plan. I yield the floor to Congressman ANDRÉ CARSON.
Madam Speaker, I just have to thank the Congressional Black Caucus for giving us a leader, a shero, a visionary, a general, and a true public servant in Chairwoman JOYCE BEATTY, a fellow Midwesterner. And when I see people like Congresswoman Beatty, it motivates me in the spirit of my grandmother, in the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer, in the spirit of Harriet Tubman, in the spirit of Sojourner Truth. That fearlessness, that boldness, that commitment to liberation and freeing us from physical shackles along with mental shackles. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to join my great colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus tonight in support of the INVEST Act, a bill that we marked up over 18 hours in the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Now, this is one of the greenest bills, Madam Speaker, to ever come to the floor. It provides strong support for sustainable infrastructure, green infrastructure, and green transit. The INVEST Act also addresses critical water projects for clean drinking water and wastewater projects, priorities that are long overdue after the racial injustices discovered in the Flint water crisis. The INVEST Act includes strong job creation, provisions for minority contractors and transportation professionals that will help spur Black generational success and wealth. We also know that access to reliable transportation is a civil rights priority. It is critical to economic and educational opportunities. This bill makes big investments to cut carbon emissions. Electric vehicle technologies expands EV charging stations and networks across our country by investing $4 billion in charging infrastructure and helping the U.S. shift to the next generation of clean vehicles. I'm especially proud of the EV charging stations approved in the bill for Indianapolis, which has one of the first green bus rapid transit systems. This bill also dedicates $8.3 billion for activities targeted to reduce carbon pollution and provides $6.2 billion for mitigation and resiliency improvements It also advances the development and utilization of green construction materials. It makes our roads safer with a great boost to smart road technologies, roadway safety programs, plus record levels of investments in walking and cycling infrastructure, complete street planning and smarter road designs, and safe routes to schools. This bill also strengthens passenger rail service, as Mr. Clyburn mentioned. At my request, our staff request, there were provisions included to improve rail safety by addressing highway rail grade crossing needs, as well as addressing trespasser and suicide fatalities and eliminating gaps in roadway safety. This bill, in closing, also creates a federal blocked crossing program to collect data and enforce a 10-minute block crossing limit. This is a huge win for the problems we faced in Indianapolis and in other places as well. The INVEST Act is a long overdue bill, and I urge my colleagues to help us in passing this monumental piece of legislation. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you so much to Congressman ANDRÉ Carson, and thank you for reminding us that America's infrastructure is in desperate need of investment. And that's what this is about. Talking about investment, Madam Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to yield to the second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the chair of the Women's Caucus, someone who understands infrastructure probably more than most of us. You see, when she started as a postal worker before she worked her way up, she was in the community. She was on those roads. She was traveling across those bridges. She was listening to people. And that's why her constituents voted her to be mayor. So as a mayor, we certainly understand the things that you're hit with the most are infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our care for human infrastructure. So it gives me great pleasure to yield the floor to the second vice chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence from Michigan's 14th District. I yield to you, Madam Second Vice Chair.
Thank you so much. Madam Speaker, I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus, and I just want to recognize and tell you how much we appreciate and how much Congress has benefited from the bold leadership of our chair, JOYCE Beatty. I thank her for hosting with the Congressional Black Caucus leadership this special order hour. I rise to speak on the urgent infrastructure issue that needs and deserves the attention and the action of this body. Our water infrastructure in the United States is in serious need of repair. Families in Michigan and across this country are struggling to get safe and clean drinking water because of lead pipes in their homes and communities, and not to mention the contamination of our water system sources. I'm from Michigan, and the Great Lakes weigh on my mind constantly as the largest body of fresh water in this country. A 2016 study found that there were more than 6 million lead service lines across the United States, serving 15 to 22 million Americans. This is a crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chair, I lived through and witnessed the Flint water crisis in Michigan. I saw where the people, United States, citizens of this country, their drinking water was poisoned. And because of that, we saw them getting sick and being hospitalized. And I'm sad to say, not only did it happen in Flint, it's happening all over our country. And this issue disproportionately affects communities of color and the poor. We have an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation chance to rebuild our infrastructure and to build back better for the American people. The Americans' Jobs Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure framework. Both tackle our water infrastructure problem. These proposals will replace lead pipelines across this country. It is an action that is long overdue. This is an investment that could not come soon enough. I want this Congress to know that the federal investment in the public water infrastructure projects, it's embarrassing to say, under our watch has fallen 63% from an overall investment in 1977 to just 9% in 2014. Let me repeat that. We invested at one time as a government 63% in our water, and now it's down to 9%. This is unacceptable. Let's pass a comprehensive infrastructure package to rebuild our water infrastructure, fix our roads and bridges, invest in an electric vehicle while creating good-paying jobs and positioning ourselves for the future. Because this is a public health issue, it's a racial justice issue, and it's an economic justice issue. Access to clean water is a basic necessity for human life. I'm grateful to stand with my colleagues from the Congressional Black Caucus and call for our nation's investment in infrastructure. This is our power, and this is our message, and we must get this done. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you so much again to Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, and she is absolutely right. This is a public issue. This is a racial justice issue because we know our roads, our bridges, our water systems are crumbling. We know our electric grid is at risk to catastrophic outages. We know many schools are crumbling from lack of attention and neglect, and too many lack access to affordable housing. Too many lack access to child care and education. Madam Speaker, what a great segue when I use the word education, that I have the honor of yielding the floor to Congresswoman ALMA Adams. We call her our HBCU czar. She is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus's HBCU, historically black colleges and universities. But she is also more than that. She has spent a lifetime educating children and college students. She serves on the powerful Financial Services Committee, and she has a strong voice on the Education and Labor Committee in Agriculture. It gives me great pleasure to yield the floor to Congresswoman ALMA Adams from North Carolina's 17th District.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Beatty, Representative Torres, thank you both. Thank you for your leadership. Madam Chair, thank you for being such a phenomenal leader and a role model for all of us. I am pleased to be here tonight to support the Congressional Black Caucus members, known as the conscience of the Congress, not only because of what we believe, but because we show up on days like this. I rise tonight to talk about an essential infrastructure investment, an investment in our historically black colleges and universities. Earlier this year, the bipartisan leadership of the HBCU caucus, Representative French Hill of Arkansas, Senator Chris Combs of Delaware, and Tim Scott of South Carolina, as well as our vice chairs, Representative Terry Sewell and Mike Turner, came together to introduce the bipartisan Ignite HBCU Excellence Act. And we introduced this legislation to help light a fire for our schools. The Ignite HBCU Excellence Act represents a historic investment in both the physical and the digital infrastructure of our historically black colleges. Our nation's HBCUs deserve a level of investment and engagement reflective of their multi-billion-dollar impact on our nation's economy and their collective impact on the minds of millions of our nation's future leaders. We have bipartisan agreement on that. Don't just take it from me. In the words of Senator Tim Scott, and I quote, HBCUs, he said, have educated and produced top-notch graduates in every field while operating on minimal budgets, and I can only imagine what more they will accomplish with proper funding. Our nation's low-income, first-generation college students deserve that opportunity. And to ensure that that happens, the schools that they attend must be made whole. There are more than 102 across this nation. I had the privilege of serving for 40 years on the campus of Bennett College in Greensboro, and I'm a graduate twice of North Carolina A&T State University, and Johnson C. Smith University is in my district. And finally, as we have a national debate about infrastructure, both in the Congress and across the country, I want to make one thing clear, that the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act is not only an infrastructure bill, it's also a jobs bill. And this bill creates jobs and enables HBCUs to continue to be a critical source of diversity in the workforce. This bill has the potential to create over 500,000 jobs while investing in critical HBCU infrastructure. Historically, Black colleges and universities are essential infrastructure for the next generation of students, of workers, innovators, athletes, creators, thinkers, and leaders. And that's why we need to pass the most transformative legislation for historically Black colleges and universities in history. And we've got to rectify over 150 years of neglect, broken promises, and institutional racism. An infrastructure package that leaves this House must include a historic investment in our HBCUs. And I'm not going to rest until we remove all of the barriers to their success and the success of our HBCU students. So colleagues, please join me in our bipartisan list of over 70 co-sponsors in the House and Senate in supporting the Ignite HBCU Excellence Act. Our power, our message. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much for yielding back, Congresswoman Alma Adams. It's always a pleasure when we have the opportunity to work together. Congressman Torres, that's what we're going to do tonight. I could not think of a better segue than to pitch it to you when we have two members of the Congressional Black Caucus from the great state of New York. I'm so used to saying the great state of Ohio, but tonight to have two freshmen, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who have been great supporters to our message, our power, who have been fearless leaders. So at this time, Congressman Torres, my co-anchor, I think it would be best for you to yield the floor and make some remarks about Congressman JAMAAL Bowman, who will speak next.
Well, not only from the great state of New York, but the great county of the Bronx. Education is infrastructure, and who better to speak about education than a lifelong educator? You know, well before running for Congress, our next speaker was a principal who dedicated his life to educating the students of the Northeast Bronx. He's one of the first Black members of Congress to ever represent Westchester County, which was historically been ground zero for resistance to fair housing. If you've ever seen the movie Show Me a Hero in Yonkers, that's the district of our next speaker. Even though he embodies how far we have come as a country, he knows more than most how far we must go. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Congressman JAMAAL Bowman.
Thank you, Congressman Torres, for that introduction and for yielding, and thank you for your overall leadership and vision, not just for our country, but for the Boogie Down Bronx. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, for yielding, and thank you for your incomparable leadership and wisdom and vision for the CBC and for our country. It is my honor to stand here with both of you to call for a big, bold, visionary infrastructure package that finally addresses the disparities in our economy. We like to think of America as the land of opportunity where anyone can achieve success and shape their own future with little more than hard work and determination. For many people, that's exactly the reality that they exist within, thanks to a little luck, determination, opportunity, and one-sided historical federal investment. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like us to believe that this accurately represents our history. But unfortunately, most Black Americans have been written out of this narrative. Consider the world as it exists today and our history of the redlining of black and brown communities, as well as other racially biased policies of the New Deal. These divisions have always been rooted in federal policy. President Biden has said he considers this infrastructure package to constitute a generational investment in the American public and in communities like mine in the Bronx, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, and Yonkers. And now is the time for us to right the wrongs of that history. The infrastructure package of 2021 must be rooted in racial and economic justice. We must uplift the care economy, fix our public housing, rebuild our crumbling schools, expand access to Medicare, and end our dependency of fossil fuels, among many other things. No American with this infrastructure package should be left behind. As the White House considers this infrastructure package, let's take a deeper trip into our history. In 1862, Congress passed the Homestead Act, redistributing 10% of the land in the country, arguably constituting the single greatest wealth transfer in our history. African Americans never received their 40 acres of land after slavery, while white Americans received millions of acres of land, which gave them the opportunity to self-actualize. Housing now accounts for over 40% of household wealth, with much of this housing-related wealth stemming from federal investments in home ownership during the New Deal. Because of redlining, one of the largest drivers of the wealth gap, of the over $1 trillion invested between 1934 and 1962 in 2021 dollars, less than 2% went to non-white families. We can no longer attempt to build out the middle class on the backs of marginalized communities. We must make sure that the next round of generational investment incorporates everyone, beginning with those most marginalized. If we make this infrastructure package inclusive and comprehensive, we can give every single American a job, a career, and the resources they need to flourish, from the Bronx to Mount Vernon to Yonkers to New Rochelle, New York. If we have the courage to address the climate, economic, and racial injustices that threaten the human race, we can give our children and grandchildren a future they deserve. We can either impart the full story of American history to our children or doom ourselves to relive it. In the case of infrastructure and investment of this scale, repeating the failures of the past is unacceptable. To meet the promise of our democracy, we must give every person in our country an opportunity to both survive and thrive. That begins with a robust and comprehensive infrastructure package. This is our time. This is our moment. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Bowman, for reminding us of our history as well as the need. I am sure if Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee was at this microphone tonight, Congressman Torres, she would look to you and she would say, let's get this done. She would look to you and she would remind us, as part of this bold action means, we must use all of our available resources. She would remind us in 2017 that the Republicans used the reconciliation process twice. Oh, how I remember how they used it against the Affordable Care Act, and how I remember that they used it not only for taking away Americans' health care, but a second time to pass the GOP tax scam of 2017 in giving more monies to those in the top 1%. But tonight, we have heard from the top of our leadership. We have heard from members from across the United States. And now it gives me great pleasure to bring our last speaker to the podium. He is also our newest member to Congress. He hails from the great state of Louisiana. He is someone who is no stranger to being an elected official. He is someone who has dedicated his life to serving the people. He has been successful. He is here in his own right, serving on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, as well as the Small Business Committee. It gives me great pleasure to yield the floor to my colleague and friend, Congressman Troy Carter.
Madam Speaker, Madam Chairman Beatty, co-anchor Torres, it is indeed an honor to join you tonight with your incredible leadership, Madam Chair, with your tenacious ability to lead, direct, and command the respect of 57 members of this august body, to fight tirelessly on behalf of the people of your district, but also all the people of our great country. I thank you for your leadership, ma'am. This week, the House will take up an important bill for our nation's future, the INVEST Act. Americans have grown weary, and justifiably so. We have talked about an infrastructure bill for a very long time, and we've kicked the proverbial ball down the road as far as we can. The people deserve more. The people deserve better. They deserve an infrastructure plan now, and one that speaks to traditional infrastructure, brick and mortar, as well as human infrastructure, broadband, housing, opportunities for our communities to rebuild, to grow, to thrive. As a member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, and as a representative of one of the largest transportation hubs in the nation, I know this legislation will reimagine and rebuild our infrastructure in Louisiana and across America. This is a big bill, and it does big things. It steps up to the challenges we face now and prepares us for challenges to come in the future. It powers economic development, creating good-paying jobs, building and fixing our crumbling infrastructure. It connects communities by supporting public transit and new high-speed, low-emission railways between cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge and the river parishes in between. It restores communities that have been harmed by old transportation decisions, like neighborhoods and districts that were cut off in half and live in the shadows of interstate overpasses. It also invests in passenger and freight rail. Both are very important to me because my district is home to the only port served by six Class 1 railroads, and it contains a corridor that badly needs new, high-speed rail from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. Investing and supporting freight rail would allow them to continue driving our economy and reducing greenhouse gases from shipping. The plan to connect New Orleans and Baton Rouge was delayed by a short-sighted decision of a previous governor. But this bill and this administration gets us back on track. Connecting two of the biggest cities in the state with high-speed passenger rail makes all the sense in the world. Tying communities together, creating jobs and opportunities throughout the state of Louisiana, providing the resources to have cleaner forms of transportation. Infrastructure now means so much more than stop signs and sidewalks. It means access to broadband, affordable and safe housing, and support for people, for caring parents and children. This bill starts and rests on our efforts and must contain and continue to move forward in the vein of including people. We need physical infrastructure, but we also need human infrastructure. We need to invest in highways and ports, but we also need to invest in the environment and the environmental safety of our communities, because I've long said that people should not have to die for their jobs. We must invest in the corrections that will create a safer and better environment. We need to invest in our people. We need to invest in affordable housing and the opportunities for neighborhoods and communities to stand up. I look forward to fighting for all of this and then some. I look forward to building back better. America deserves better. America deserves more. America deserves a robust infrastructure plan, and America deserves it now. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Carter. Madam Speaker, how much time do we have left, please?
1.5 minutes.
Then let me close by saying thank you to all of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. It was clear tonight that infrastructure is not only a big word, but it's a big deal, which encompasses many concepts which comprises modern American infrastructure. For some members we have heard tonight, it is the traditional roads and bridges and waterways. For others, it is broadband, it is housing, it is human care. Regardless of the definition, the Congressional Black Caucus is ready to stand in the gap to support legislation and policies that will help infrastructure invest in Americans' future so we can build back better. Congressman Torres, I'll yield the last seconds to you to say thank you to our members.
Thank you, and I will just quickly state, we're in the midst of an FDR moment, and we have a historic opportunity to govern as boldly in the 21st century as FDR did in the 20th century. But the difference between then and now is ours is going to be a new deal for everyone.
Thank you.
Black and brown New Deal.
Strong. Congressional Black Caucus, our power, our message. Thank you.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, Madam, pursuant to Section 3S of House Resolution 8, following consultation with the Office of Attending Physician, I write to provide you further notification that the public health emergency due to the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 remains in effect. Signed sincerely, William J. Walker, Sergeant at Arms.
The chair announces the extension pursuant to Section 3 of House Resolution 8 and effective July 4th, 2021 of the covered period designated on January 4th, 2021. Pursuant to Section 11B of House Resolution 188, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate and noon for legislative business.